Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Multiple ways to interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also hit us up on Twitter, hashtag Giants Chat. You could come directly to us at Lance Medow, one word, last name, Medow. He is at Giants WFAN. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. So we have a new addition to the Giants coaching staff, so we'll discuss that. And there's also some news and notes from around the NFL because another head coach has been hired, and that could start a domino effect as we still have 4 vacancies across the league. But let's start on the Giants front, and we talked about this, that Brian Daboll had 2 vacancies of note to fill. Defensive coordinator and a special teams coordinator as they parted ways with Thomas McGahee. Well, they have filled the void left behind by McGahee, and they're bringing in Michael Ghobrial as their new special teams coordinator. He spent the last 3 seasons with the Jets working under their special teams coordinator, Brent Boyer. He was a special teams assistant, 36 years old. He's going to turn on February 9th, so a young up-and-coming coach. But prior to the NFL, he did serve, Paul, as a special teams coordinator at the collegiate level. He was at Washington State in 2020. He was at the University of Hawaii in 2018 and 19, and then Tarleton State University in 2016 and 2017. So even though he hasn't been a coordinator on the NFL level, he has run his own special teams units at 3 different college institutions.
He has. I would say this, being a part of a good special teams unit with the Jets for the last 3 years certainly bodes well in addition to that because, yes, they've had some good special teams players. I certainly don't want to neglect to mention that. But when you have a unit that's been good over a course of time, not just for one season, but for a few seasons, well, chances are they've got a good philosophy, a good foundation, and a good framework. And when you take a guy from that framework, you'd like to believe that that's going to be added value besides his actual coaching ability. You'll think that he'll bring some of that framework with him. Now, as far as the Jets are concerned this past year, I'll give you a good example. Much better than the Giants were on special teams in terms of return game. They were right in the middle of the pack in punt returns and basically in the middle of the pack in kickoff returns. As you probably know, folks, Giants have not had much in the return game the last few years. Olszewski came in and was like a breath of fresh air, had the big 90-plus yard punt return for a touchdown at the end of the season. But I think we would all probably agree that, he was like the needle in the haystack in terms of the highlights for the Giants' return game for the last, 3 years? Is that fair?
Could even go further back. I would say Dwayne Harris.
Yeah, probably since him.
And that's a little bit further back.
He was really good.
Oh, yeah.
Really good. Four-way.
Yep.
Four-way.
Core.
And before him, Dominic Hickson. He was Dominic Hickson 2.0 is what Dwayne Harris was.
Yep.
So, I think that's what you're looking at if you're the Giants. Now, I do think the Giants got a good year out of Jamie Gillen. I do think the Giants' punt coverage team, they were, I believe, 6th in the NFL in punt coverage this past season. So, he's got gunners. Well, I'm assuming Nick McLeod comes back. He's, I believe, a restricted free agent, so I think he'll be back. Darnay Holmes turned out to be really good down the stretch. Whether or not he comes back, I don't know. I believe his contract is up. But those 2 guys were the best gunners on the team. And as the season went on, they got better and better and better. So there's something to work with there, But in any event, that's probably about all I could say about that situation because, quite frankly, I've never met this coach.
Well, he's still young, and as I mentioned, he doesn't have a wealth of experience on the NFL level, so that's why he's not necessarily a household commodity. I just want to piggyback off of your point about how the Jets special teams is operated, and once again, we're not saying that he's bringing over the Jets personnel with him. You've got to look at it through that lens, but to Paul's point, schematics, philosophy that he learned from the Jets can be applied here to the Giants. So here's some highlights in terms of the numbers. Jets kickoff coverage. led the league. They allowed an average of just 15.3 yards a return. Their opponent's 40.4-yard net punting average ranked 7th in the NFL. So that speaks once again of not allowing and giving up explosive plays to the opposition. Rookie Xavier Gipson, who had that big overtime return, if you remember the opener against the Buffalo Bills when Aaron Rodgers went down. He was second in the league, 23.2-yard kickoff return average, tied for 12th with a 9.7-yard punt return. And once again, Gibson's not coming over, but blocking, Paul, to your point, is a big part in helping Gibson put up those numbers consistently, and it was highlighted by that 65-yard touchdown return that I mentioned against the Bills. Ashton Davis was among the league leaders with 12 special teams tackles, 9 solo, also forced and recovered a fumble. And then the previous season, their special teams captain, Justin Hardy, was selected to his first Pro Bowl. He posted a career-high 14 tackles. He became just the 6th Jets special teamer to be selected to the Pro Bowl since 1970 and the only core special teamer. So even they didn't necessarily have a track record in that department, and he was part of helping turn the page with that unit.
Now, just as a matter of correction, the Giants, I'm looking up the number now, they were 7th in punt coverage this year, not 6th, as I had stated earlier. They were for most of the season.
Everyone was taking notes at home, and they were going to...
So I apologize. They were 7th. That is ironically the one area where the Jets special teams did not fare well. Believe it or not, in terms of punt coverage, they were 23rd in the league. That was the one area out of the 4, the 2 returns and then the 2 coverage units, where they did not rate very well. But that was a strength for the Giants. So, we'll see how that whole thing kind of fits. I will say this, though. With the Jets, who did he work with? Brett Boyer.
Yep.
Brett Boyer, outstanding special teams player when he played in the National Football League and has been a coach now for a few years. Again, you don't necessarily gain stuff through osmosis. I don't want to go that far, but you talk about having a really good influence. Brett Boyer was a special teams guru. He really was. He was something special.
I'll use the comparison when we had conversations about Carmen Bracillo, who was just hired as the offensive line coach. One of the things we talked about, it was brief, but he did learn from Dante Scarnecchia, one of the best offensive line coaches in NFL history. So if you look at Boyer, to your point, played for the Dolphins, the Jaguars, and the Browns from 1994 to 2004, over a decade in the NFL as a special teamer. As a coach, was actually a training camp intern with the Giants back in 2010, and then an assistant special teams coach with the Colts, and then he's been the special teams coordinator with the Jets going back to 2016.
Yeah.
So the point is, but that's actually important to note because we're talking about how he came into a system that had already been established that Boyer helped build. So he's learned a lot from an experienced individual that has been an actual coordinator for several years in the NFL, and now he's going to have an opportunity to create his own map and build his own bridges here, Ghobrial.
Mission number 1, re-sign Osefsky.
Well, I'm sure people in the building will tell him that that's probably one of their biggest priorities as well, because Joe Shane made that acquisition midway through the season.
That was a great pickup.
It was significant. And this was something you talked about earlier. You want to have a core group of players that you could turn to.
Yes.
Coverage, return, some sense of explosiveness. And I think there are some pieces here, but I guarantee you he'll come in, he'll have conversations with Brian Dable in the front office, and he'll have some ideas about some personnel.
Sure.
I mean, I haven't looked that carefully. I'm sure there probably are a few Jets special teamers that are set to hit the market. That could be potential targets as well. And you mentioned the Giants are going to have voids anyway because Darnay Holmes is an unrestricted free agent. Gunnar Olszewski is a free agent. And then Nick McLeod is a restricted free agent who you referenced earlier. So there's 3 guys who play different roles on special teams. This is why when you hire a coach, you can't get caught up in the personnel. It's more of, okay, philosophically speaking, what did this individual help do for that organization?
Well, I will say this. We know the Giants have some work to do during this offseason, and it's good that one of those spots has finally been filled. They still have to fill the D.C. spot, and I'm sure a lot of folks, as I would concur, is a very significant spot. But, hey, special teams still 1/3 of the game. And as Jeff Fiegels would always tell us, do not underestimate the value of field position.
Well, and here's why you shouldn't. underestimated and undervalue it. If you look at the Giants over the last 2 years, Paul, given the offensive struggles, if you can get a good return, think about the wonders that could do, right?
Tilt the field.
For your offense.
Tilt the field.
Okay? If you don't have to go 75 yards and instead you have to go 65, even a 10-yard difference makes a whole lot of progress from an offensive standpoint. And then the same thing is, you don't want to put your defense in a precarious spot. Case in point this season, if you're not scoring a lot, you're under 20 points, and you give up favorable field position, Paul, to the opposition, now you're putting them in scoring position, and now you're putting that much more pressure on your defense. So it goes hand in hand in terms of what it could do on both sides of the equation. I'm not just talking about the return game. I think people, they focus way too much on the return game. No, the coverage unit could be a huge X factor as well.
Absolutely.
Now, you brought up other coordinators. Let's get into some NFL news and notes before we open up the phone lines. I want to start on the defensive side of the ball because a big name became a free agent yesterday in Vic Fangio as the Dolphins decided to move on from him.
And then he got wrapped up by the Eagles.
And then, yes, we hear this morning, though it was rumored immediately why he parted ways with the Dolphins. He's a Pennsylvania guy, wanted to be closer to home. And now we heard from ESPN's Adam Schefter right before we went on that he's en route to flying to Philadelphia to sign the contract. So Vic Fangio will now be coming to the NFC East. And somebody that the Giants, forget about them potentially bringing him in. Now they're going to have to solve his defenses at least twice per season. And he is a very well-respected and well-established defensive coordinator. He coincidentally was Jim Harbaugh's DC the last time Harbaugh coached in the NFL with the Niners. He's now back in the mix with the Chargers. I want to get to that in a second. And did a really nice job with the Bears, let's not forget, if you recall, under Matt Nagy. So everywhere Fangio has gone, and that was a Dolphins defense, by the way, Paul, hammered by injuries in the second half of the season.
Sure.
And they were still competitive all the way through. So I think it says a lot about his scheme and his coaching ability.
Yeah, I think this is more about him wanting to go home than
without a doubt.
The Dolphins wanting to get rid of him.
Sure. And here's the other thing that is important for us to bring to the forefront, and we talked about this a lot, and we field phone calls. Fangio had to get permission from the Dolphins to go their separate ways, because this was a lateral move, Paul.
Correct.
Okay? He's not getting a boost. He's not becoming a head coach. When that happens in the NFL and you're under contract, the team has to give permission. That's the difference as opposed to you get elevated. That changes the dynamics of things. So that's important to highlight. Now, as I referenced, Harbaugh going back to the West Coast, to the Chargers, which means now that Chargers assistants will in all likelihood become available. I'm not saying that the Giants were eyeing them, but remember, there's a lot of assistants that they're in a wait-and-see period, right, until the new head coach comes in.
This is the most stressful time for all of those guys because there are dominoes that are going to get knocked off the table, that are going to fall on the floor, and then every one of those are going to be in a scramble, hoping that they can land somewhere else. And, you know, look, just so you folks understand how this stuff works, okay? Team has an opening, and they have a list of interviews that they want to go through. And they're reaching out, and they're talking to those folks. Well, each one of those head coach candidates or coordinator candidates also has a bunch of guys that he's calling and saying, listen, I'm going to interview with Team X. If I wind up landing that job, do you think you'd be interested in coming with me? So you see how the telephone calls spider web out. And when you have as many jobs as were open this past offseason, it was 7, and then Antonio Pierce wound up locking up the Raider job. So it was kind of 8, but it was really 7.
Well, I mean, they conducted an interview process, so it's a legitimate 8.
So you have a slew of coaches that are spider webbing out with phone calls, talking to people who they think they'd be interested in having and asking those folks, hey, what do you think? And those folks are saying, yeah, I'd probably be interested in coming, but I got 3 other people who are also telling me if they land a job, I kind of would be interested in going to that place too. So it's a messy time.
Well, and that's why one day it seems like a coach is headed in one direction, then all of a sudden new options present themselves. Case in point, right before we went on the air, I don't know if you saw Kellen Moore, who was the Chargers offensive coordinator.
Yes.
Now he's receiving interest from the Eagles and the Browns.
I did not see that.
Because they have offensive coordinator openings. So Kellen Moore may be back in the NFC East if the Eagles ultimately hire him. And I'm not surprised that Nick Sirianni's going in the direction of established play callers. You got me thinking, you know what's also fascinating now about the NFC East? We know the Giants are going to have to get a new defensive coordinator. The Eagles brought in Vic Fangio. Washington's going to have a new defensive coordinator.
And Dan
Dallas,
Quinn has been interviewing with Seattle.
So all four teams may actually have new defensive schemes this season. How about that? And all four teams didn't change head coaches. That's what's crazy about it.
You know, again, I've talked about this numerous times on the program. You know, the scheme is one thing, the coach is another. In other words, there are a lot of guys who specialize in 3-4. There are other guys who specialize in 4-3. Then you've got some guys who just say, well, I'm a mix. I'm a hybrid. Remember Patrick Graham used to talk about that all the time. I'm neither. Okay,
You're in between, in the gray area. Yes.
Fine. But, you know, that's an interesting dynamic as you start looking around and you want to make these phone calls and want to talk to these guys. You've got to figure out, what is it that's your top priority? You know, do you want somebody who is going to keep the same basic framework? I won't say scheme. I'll say framework of what you were running. Press man, 3-4, heavy blitz. Is that the framework that you want to keep going with this next Giants defensive coordinator? Or you're like, well, you know what? We'd rather have a guy who plays Tampa 2. We'd like to have a guy who's going to be 4 down linemen. You know, we're not going to play a ton of press man. We'll play Tampa 2, 3/4 coverage. You know, we're not going to do a whole bunch of that. I mean, this is stuff you got to figure out.
And the reason why Dable may be taking his time is because of that reason that you mentioned. He wants to hear back from as many people as possible. And also, maybe somebody now becomes available that he was thinking about, to your point about having previous conversations.
Yes, could
and
be.
Now a new head coach comes in. Because think about this. The Chargers, the Patriots, the Raiders, and the Titans have all hired their new coaches. Now, Antonio Pierce, I know, is going to bring in some of his new staff members, but Patrick Graham's his DC. So the only reason Patrick Graham leaves is if he gets a head coaching position.
Right.
So that's not going to change. Tennessee, Brian Callahan's going to bring in a brand new staff.
I'm sure.
The Patriots, okay, Mayo was an internal person, so he may retain some individuals. Harbaugh is now probably going to go in a completely different direction.
Probably.
So everybody is probably going to have the freedom to do that, including, by the way, Brandon Staley was a defensive coordinator before he took over the head coach. We haven't heard his name, but he's out there.
Well, this is a recent development with Harbaugh. We may, in the next 24 hours, hear that his name is being dialed up.
Well, I highly doubt, though, Harbaugh's going to bring back Staley to be his defensive coordinator.
I don't think he will.
After he lost
Exactly.
the head coaching.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
Unusual. Though Vance Joseph did return to Denver as the defensive coordinator after becoming the head coach. But some time elapsed in between. Now we have the Commanders, the Falcons, the Panthers, and the Seahawks. Coaches from those four teams, once we get solidification on who the head man is, could very well become available. So just something to take into consideration.
And I will tell you, folks, I'm not going to name any names, but there is a assistant coach who I know very, very well, who was really hoping to land an NFL assistant coaching job. And as these dominoes were being shuffled across the dining room table, he got an offer from a Division I college, a very prominent Division I college, to be on the staff there. And basically what it came down to was he couldn't wait.
I don't blame him, though.
He was very concerned that after the dominoes got all cleaned up with the NFL openings, that he may wind up out of a job. So he decided, you know what, bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Sure.
And so he wound up taking an assistant coach's job with a college team, a prominent college team, because he just decided, I can't take a chance that I'll be left out once the dominoes are cleaned up.
I don't blame him.
And these things do happen. And so that's a guy now who's out of the mix. And maybe there were teams that, in fact, I know there were teams interested in him, but he was like, I'm not waiting. I gotta make a decision.
I'll give you real quickly another example before we open up the phone lines. Fangio, interestingly, to bring this conversation back full circle, was on the Eagles staff as a consultant towards the tail end of 2022. That was the year they went to the Super Bowl. There was mutual interest for Fangio to be the coordinator to replace Jonathan Gannon. So what happened is Miami comes calling. I'm not saying it was a similar thing, but if a team offers you the defensive coordinator, or you just wait and think Gannon may leave, he may get the Cardinals job, and then what happens if Gannon doesn't leave, doesn't get the job? Yeah, maybe there's room for you, but you don't have the position you want, so you take whatever's offered you.
Timing is a very big deal here.
Especially given the merry-go-round on the coaching front. Few reminders, Giants Huddle Podcast. You can check that out by subscribing to your favorite podcast platform, or you can go to giants.com/podcast. 2024, we got to get through free agency. We got to get through the draft. We got to get through this man surviving the offseason. But that doesn't mean that you still can't prioritize perhaps taking your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. You can stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2024 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, you can visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And the Giants official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV, it brings you original video content, game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. And you can use that to watch us right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. All right, let's open up the phone lines as we move forward here. And let's check in with Alex in Syracuse, joining us on BBKL. What's happening, Alex? What do you got for us?
Hey, guys. How you doing today?
We're doing very well. What's on your mind?
I was talking to a friend, an old friend that is allegedly a lifelong Giants fan.
Allegedly, so that means you're calling him into question, I guess, his status. That's one way to word it.
So,
okay.
Here's the thing. So he's a guy that back in the day when Eli first started, when Eli was struggling in those first couple of seasons, my friend was calling for Eli's head on a stick, basically. Now, Eli Manning is favorite player of all time, right? It's as though all the things that he once said to me never existed about Eli Manning. So we're having a conversation about Daniel Jones, similar situation. And we're kind of having this back and forth. And I want to pose to you guys this question that I posed to him to make sort of a further point. So my question to him and to you is, if you knew, knowing already what you know now about this entire 2023 season, if you could go back in time knowing what you know now, would you trade Daniel Jones for Brock Purdy?
Well, it's an interesting question. Here's the problem with that question. Brock Purdy, I would argue, and I made this conversation point about C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young, Paul. Purdy, to me, and I'm not taking anything away from his skill set, I think he benefits from the talent he has in San Francisco, Alex, to answer your question. So if you put Brock Purdy with the Giants, and that means you don't have Deebo Samuel, you don't have Brandon Ayuk, you don't have Christian McCaffrey, you don't have a really good offensive line with one of the best left tackles of all time in Trent Williams, and you don't have a really good, well-coached defense. Not to say Purdy can't be successful, but something tells me he's probably not with his team going as far as he did with San Francisco. So my answer on the surface based on that would be no.
I will say this. Excuse me. Purdy looks a little bit more mistake-prone here down the stretch than he has when he had all of his pieces in place. Now that he's had some chinks in the armor and some of these guys have been missing, he just doesn't look like the same guy. He just doesn't. He looks more mistake-prone. He looks less assertive. So I'm going to agree with Lance here that the environment around him was so good. I remember many years ago, Wally and the Keeg used to be a show on ESPN Radio here in New York for many years. Tom Keegan was Wally Matthews' partner in Afternoon Drive. And when I was with ESPN Radio in that time, I was covering the Giants. They used to have me on like 2-3 times a week. And Tom used to say, incubator athlete. Incubator athlete is a guy who, if everything around him is exactly the way it's supposed to be, he'll help you kick butt. He will function at the highest of levels, and it'll be smooth sailing and everything's going great. But all of a sudden, when things aren't all right around him, you don't have the O-line, you don't have the running game, you got receivers dropping passes, things start to fall apart.
Sure.
Now he falls apart and crumbles with them. So I'm I'll be honest with you. I'm starting to wonder if Purdy is not an incubator quarterback. Because I will say this, without Deebo Samuel, that offense looks a lot different. He was that important to the scope of what they do offensively. And Purdy is just not looking like the same guy right now.
Well, and that's why when he missed 2 games after the earlier shoulder injury, the Niners went on that 3-game skid, if you remember.
Yeah.
Now, they lost the Cleveland game by a missed field goal at the end of regulation, but still, it definitely takes a toll. But you're leaving us on the edge of our seats, Alex. So what about your answer and your alleged friend who is a Giants fan's answer? Because, I'm taking notes, and I'm going to question whether or not he'll elevate his fandom or you're going to elevate your fandom based on the future of Daniel Jones. So be careful the next words that come out of your mouth.
I got a better question before you answer that. Would your friend have advocated to get rid of Phil Simms after his first few injury-plagued seasons, or would he have stuck with him to win the Super Bowl?
No, knowing my friend, he would have advocated to get rid of Phil Simms, probably, which is, again, to my point.
Yeah.
So he, to answer your question, Lance, he without question, because he's a fantasy guy, he's a stats guy, which, again,
understandable.
Stats, but
okay.
So
he's a fantasy guy. You just said it all. Go ahead.
Exactly, right, Paul? But that was my larger point. It's what you said, Lance, is that a lot of times I feel like the quarterback conversation right now around the Giants lacks context. We want to put a lot on a quarterback, and this is what the league is. I get it, but we put too much blame and I think too much credit to quarterbacks.
Always.
Which is why I think the Brock Purdy thing is a good example, because I agree with you, Lance. I think it's exactly what you said, which is my argument was I think if you would switch those two guys this season, not only do I think that Brock Purdy has as poor of a season as Daniel Jones did this year, I also think, honestly, and again, I know it's hypothetical, I think Daniel Jones, with that offensive line and those weapons, might even be a slight upgrade from Brock Purdy in San Francisco, and really not to take anything away from Purdy. I think he's a good enough quarterback, and you got to give the guy credit for what he's done. But that's my point, is that I think when I look at them just player versus player at the position, I take Daniel Jones every day of the week over Brock Purdy.
In short, San Francisco makes that trade in a heartbeat.
I would think so, right?
Well, I don't know from a financial standpoint, though. Right now,
well, he said last year before the contract.
Well, but Purdy. Right. Well, okay. If you go last year, yes, he didn't receive the deal at that point.
Right.
I understand.
He had not had the extension at that point.
Well, and also, Alex, listen, and we'll let you go on that point, and appreciate the phone call. There's a reason Brock Purdy was the last overall pick. Okay, in 2022. I'm not saying that every team didn't do their due diligence, but there's a lot of crafty and knowledgeable executives in the NFL, Paul. If they all saw something in Purdy, he would have been selected much earlier in the draft. Mm-hmm. So you have to look at it through that lens as well. What they've gotten out of Brock Purdy should be commended. When it just goes to show you, when you surround a quarterback who you take with the last overall pick, you put him in that environment, you have a good scheme, you can win football games.
When you have the luxury of such a high-level roster that has so many pieces and components in place that you can then grab an inexpensive quarterback to do what he needs to do to get your team to function, God bless you, man. That means you found a couple of 4-leaf clovers up on top of the hill, and you just run with those suckers to the bank, right? Why? We're not going to hold it against them. The Niners fell into a great situation because they had already crafted such a wonderful roster around him that they did not need the more expensive, more accomplished, more headline-grabbing quarterback. I told you this from the very beginning. I wouldn't have traded Garoppolo. I thought they should have stuck with Jimmy G. And then they were fools when they drafted Trey Lance. I told you that. That was a terrible move. That's the last thing in the world that they should have done. And they realized it and then wound up trading him.
Well, I was a big proponent of Jimmy G, but similar, and this actually relates to the Daniel Jones conversation, Jimmy, though, has struggled to stay healthy. You needed another option on that team. Whether you kept him, you still needed to have somebody else you could turn to. And that's the other part of the Daniel Jones, Brock Purdy hypothetical that the last caller just brought up. And I don't love the hypotheticals, but if we just run with what the last caller brought up, the one question that you don't know, even if you put Daniel in a different environment, does he hold up, Paul? Okay? Because he's going to run if you put him in San Francisco. And if he absorbs the hits, the durability questions are still there. So you can't bank on that he's still going to play 17 games, even if you put him in that San Francisco environment.
Better offensive line.
Well, there's no doubt about it. But regardless of the offensive line, some of the hits that Daniel Jones has been exposed to also are a product of him choosing to be aggressive and run with the football. All right, let's head back to the lines. We got Dave in Michigan joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Dave? What do you got for us?
Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing.
Have you got a pen handy?
Well, I do. I have a pen handy. So
I'm gonna do a rapid fire, and you guys can address whichever items you want. Okay.
Okay. So there's a smorgasbord offering, and we get to choose whatever we like.
It's a salad bar at lunch.
Okay. Yes.
Choose your adventure.
It's a salad bar at lunch.
Okay.
All right, here you go. All right. First of all, I'm on record saying I want us to trade back to get more draft capital.
Okay.
But if we don't have a trading partner, and we're going at number 6, I want either Bowers or Alt, whichever one is on the board.
Mm-hmm.
So, because listening to the draft podcast, it seems like we can snag some really good players in the second round. So, one thing I want to say, I was wrong, and I'm happy to admit it, about Robinson. I thought he was too small and too slight to make it in the NFL, especially after he went down. But he really opened my eyes. Do you think, and would you try to do a deal with the Commanders to bring Nick Gates back as a center guard for depth? I want to jettison Lemieux and Peart. Thank you for your service. We're not interested anymore. I want to clarify something. Coach Marvin followed me the other day. I love Coach Marvin. I said I did not want Jaden Daniels. I've watched all the LSU games. You know, one thing about Jaden Daniels is weird. He looks smaller on the field than he actually is. Like, I looked him up, and that was what always bothered me. I looked him up, and he's actually 6'4", 210 is what he's listed at. So I'm altering my opinion on that a bit. My second round options, we get 2 picks. I like Coleman from Florida State and Mitchell from Texas as far as receivers go. Zach Zinter could also be a good deal if he falls to the second round. I know he broke his leg. Free agency, Jonah Williams and Trent Brown. Those are the 2 guys I like in free agency. And I got one last thing to say. Our guy, Joe's right-hand man, Brian Brown is his name, right?
Brandon Brown.
Brandon Brown, yeah. The assistant GM.
Sorry.
Yeah.
He had his second interview, apparently, with the Chargers.
Correct. Yep.
If he listens to this podcast, do not take it. First of all, the owner...
We'll let him know.
Yeah. Well, because obviously he listens to it anyway. You don't have to let him know. He's listening. He's actually tuning in right now. But yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't take it. The owner broke the cardinal rule. He hired his head coach before his general manager. That's the first thing. The guy he hired, Harbaugh, who I know very well, being here in Michigan, Harbaugh thinks that he's Belichick, and he's going to want total control. So why would a guy like him, who's an up-and-coming, very smart general manager candidate, why would he want to go into a situation?
Well, Dave, I'll tell you, I'll make this real simple. How many general manager jobs are there in this world, in the National Football League? How many individuals get to call themselves a general manager in the NFL? 32, right? So if there's only 32 opportunities and you get an opportunity, you're going to take that. I'll give you another great example. John Schneider was hired as the Seahawks general manager. Pete Carroll had full control over decision-making power on that roster. He's now, for the first time, going to be able to make those choices himself. They work together hand in hand. Schneider gets a lot of credit for all the great talent they drafted and all the years winning. So if Harbaugh has success, Brown benefits, and I guarantee you Harbaugh, if he's smart, would listen to some of the front office personnel as well. So I don't look at it as detrimental as you're painting the picture to be.
He's going to be very frustrated, let me tell you. I used to work at the University of Michigan, and so I had some dealings with Harbaugh. He's going to wish he didn't take it.
Well, he doesn't have the job yet, so we will keep you posted, and we appreciate the phone call. I'm actually surprised that we didn't get recommendations in terms of what the kitchen staff should be cooking for Friday or next Monday. That was the only thing that was missing from that dissertation in terms of the breakdown of everything. I did take notes, actually, so I hope that you're patting me on the back from afar, Dave. I did write down a few highlights of what I can recall. Well, Jaden Daniels, the one thing I want to say is you don't know whether or not he'll be on the board when the Giants selected 6. So keep that in mind. I mean, you could love a player. You could fall in love with a player. The first 3 picks could very well be quarterbacks. Paul, you and I have said this. If something drastically doesn't change, Daniels could very well be one of those top 3 guys. And he certainly makes a case for it. So by the time the Giants pick 6, Daniels may not even be within striking distance. So, I mean, his size or his lack thereof in terms of imagery versus on the field, I don't think that necessarily makes a difference. In terms of Nick Gates got some good money from Washington in that deal.
He did, and quite frankly, with his injury history, if you're talking about having a guy be the swing center backup guard, to me, I would re-sign Ben Bredesen. That, to me, would be the spot for him. I mean, he is an unrestricted free agent, and I would bring Bredesen back, and he would fill that role. You don't need 2 guys to fill that role.
Well, also, I would say it's a lot of money to be investing in a guy that's an insurance policy to bring back Nick Gates.
Who, again, has also had injury history.
Sure. And
Bredesen's a lot healthier.
No, there's no doubt about it. Plus, and I know, listen, the offensive line overall for Washington had a very rough season.
It did.
Nick Gates was also benched at some point.
Let's
not forget about that.
He had a tough time at center.
He did.
In fact, specifically, Dexter Lawrence really, really gave him a rough game when they were here at the Meadowlands.
And that was a player that he saw in practice every single day, too. Mm-hmm. So I think that says an awful lot. He threw out 2 free agent offensive linemen, Jonah Williams with the Bengals, who's also dealt with some injuries during the course of his career, and then Trent Brown, who was with the Niners, the Raiders, the Patriots.
Real long in the tooth.
Yes. So those are 2 guys that are up there in age and experience that have been mentioned. Now, is there an opportunity for a swing experienced tackle, Paul, on this team? Absolutely, there is. Mm-hmm. But I also think you want to probably get younger a little bit. That doesn't mean you got to go through the draft, but somebody that has a little bit more upside than maybe those 2 guys, so that in the event that either Andrew Thomas or Evan Neal go down or there's struggles, that you feel good that that player could come in and start for the bulk of the season, Paul. I think you got to protect yourself in that department.
Well, part of the problem you also have to think about, too, is if you're going to spend some money on an offensive lineman, because let's face it, they're all going to cost you something. You're not getting one cheap. Even if you want a swing tackle, you're going to pay some money for a swing tackle.
Sure.
Do you want to invest the money or the draft capital in a guard or in a tackle? If you think that Evan Neal is going to come back and be your starting right tackle, which is kind of what Joe Shane has alluded to, then you're after a 3rd tackle. If you don't think that Evan Neal is going to be your starting right tackle, then you need a starting right tackle. Because Evan Neal then is in a battle for a job, or I know so many people keep saying they want to bump him inside. I don't think that's going to happen, nor do I think it should. But
even Shane mentioned that he was hesitant because he saw the film
correct.
At Alabama,
so,
based on his most recent presser, mid-season.
That impacts how you're going to either spend your money or your draft capital. Are you looking at a guard, or are you looking at a priority for a 3rd tackle or a starting tackle? You got to figure that out. And that's a very, very hard question given the circumstances that we've seen.
Anything else you would like to respond to after that lengthy phone call? Do you think that
we covered it all
elements? I mean, I have check marks on all of my notes that I jotted down. I was just wondering if you took some mental notes that I
Dave, are there any hard-boiled eggs at the salad bar?
We'll get to that later on in the program. Who knows? Maybe Brandon Brown will give us a ring, too, to give us his 2 cents on what his negotiations are like as well. All right, let's head back to the lines. We got Dave in Texas joining us here on BBKO. What's happening, Dave? What do you got for us?
Good evening, fellas. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good afternoon.
I don't know what time zone you're in. Yes, okay.
I made a mistake. A young man.
All good.
Older people make mistakes. I'm 82.
Not a problem. We'll allow it.
Paul, with this. Paul, do you remember Phil Simms' early years as quarterback?
Absolutely.
And do you remember how he used to get hurt and tore up, and he was no good, and get rid of Phil Simms? I remember all of that. I'm here
Sure.
thinking now with Daniel Jones. Phil Simms took us to a Super Bowl and set a record that still stands today over 50 years. And was it 1990? He went 10-0 till he tore his ankle up. They gave the guy the ball. Here, go run, do what you got to do. I'm not saying that our new quarterback there, the young man, is not going to get hurt again, but he has never had a front line in front of him, for God's sake. Give the kid a break, and I'll take your answer off the air. Thank you, Paul.
All right, Dave. Oh, I don't get a thank you. Only
Well-
you do. Okay. Well, listen, this is your territory, Paul. I don't want to step on
Can I pass a thank you to you?
No, it's okay. It's all right. I'll try to recover
I
over the
think
remainder
the only
of the show.
counter, because I brought up that particular scenario several times, okay? Phil Simms didn't really get a grasp on the Giants starting quarterback job until a handful of years in, because he had injury after injury after injury. And there were folks who absolutely wanted to discard him, okay? But finally, in '84, that was his team. And look what he did with them. You know, obviously the ascension and the quick ascension to becoming a championship club, you know, happened with only a couple of years, because in '86 they won it all. Here's the problem, and the only counter that people throw back at me when I refer to Phil Simms and his scenario, it's that there was no salary cap.
I'm the first one to bring that up. But go ahead, yes.
Okay? So without a salary cap, you could afford to be patient and
Bingo.
wait for the guy to heal. Wait for the guy to pick up all the things that you try to teach him. Wait as the offensive line develops and as you establish a run game and as you get a better defense, blah, 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 blah. They were allowed, Phil Simms was given the time by this organization because George Young insisted on it. He was given the time to develop into the star that he became and the Super Bowl MVP that he became, because you had the luxury to do so. Today, the salary cap punishes you for having to wait and be patient with a player. And if you make a mistake, it punishes you even more because of the dead money on the cap. Part of the reason, as you've heard me say 1,000 times, maybe it's up to 1.5 gazillion times now, I preferred the structure of the game then as opposed to the business structure of the game today. Because I would like to give players an opportunity to exhaust all their chances before I discard them. That's just me, because I've seen it. I've learned from it, and I've seen it. If there's redeeming value in the guy, you want it to come out. And Phil Simms certainly was able to rise to the occasion with the patience the Giants showed him.
Well, think about how the Giants were able to hold on to Jeff Hostetler.
Exactly. There's another one.
This
and
guy,
not because of injury now. Haas was just buried.
No, correct. He was buried. But the point is, in today's NFL, Hostetler probably gets a gig elsewhere by this time.
Oh, no doubt.
And he's starting elsewhere. I mean, the man was begging to play other positions to get on the field.
He played special teams.
That's
he blocked a punt.
Yeah.
He played receiver during practice sessions. I used to watch him lining up on the boundary, running out for passes. I mean, he was so desperate to do anything during practice. And George Young kept saying, nope. Haas kept asking, I want out of here. Give me a trade. Nope.
But he didn't have a say because of the financial structures in place. So, see, players are not very open
financial,
to that as well.
but also the free agency structure.
Yeah. No, of course.
Okay.
But players would argue.
Boy, those rules were so much better.
Yeah, well.
Wow.
It didn't necessarily benefit the player, though, and that's why you hear most players at least welcoming some of these new economic rules. But that's why, I mean, you just hit it on the nose. That's why every time Phil Simms is brought up by a caller, that I'm hesitant to use that as a fair comparison to Daniel Jones.
Circumstances were different.
Yeah, very different.
The environment was different.
And
the
with
rules
Daniel,
were different.
And here's the other thing, Paul. With Daniel, it's not so much having a conversation about, we understand that the offensive line to play in the trenches has not allowed him to have the level of success, or at least operate within the confines of the level of success of other quarterbacks. But what you can at least include from a factual standpoint, and you don't have to go down the hypothetical road, is the injuries that he has suffered. And that makes it challenging for a team in this day and age because of the salary cap restrictions to say, okay, this is going to be the year where he plays all 17 games. And then he's going to follow that through with another 17-game slate. You can't bank on that. It's very hard to do that in today's NFL.
Over the years, I'm just going to pick two quick names that come to my mind. Quarterbacks who were not given patience by their initial teams and then wound up going somewhere else and flourishing.
Oh, sure.
I mean, Drew Brees, right there.
Well, I mean,
Drew Brees
had
the injury.
some success with the Chargers.
Had some success, had the injury. They weren't going to be patient with him. Boom. He winds up going to the Saints and becomes a Hall of Famer.
Well, how about the Dolphins passing up on Brees as well?
No question.
The medical.
Now, and the best example of all is Jim Plunkett. Jim Plunkett came out of Stanford, and he gets drafted by the San Francisco 49ers. Okay, he was with the Niners and the Patriots. Patriots drafted him first. Patriots drafted him first.
Yeah.
Then he went to the Niners, and his career was nothing. He was on his way to being a journeyman, and he got hurt, and he wasn't any good, and he was on bad teams. And
Patriots drafted.
It was Patriots, and then 49ers
and the Raiders.
And then he goes to the Raiders. Boom, Super Bowl. All of a sudden, the guy's going to the Pro Bowl, and he's got a Lombardi Trophy. Because those other two teams didn't want to be patient. They couldn't wait for him to get everything squared away or to get the rest of their team squared away so that he could succeed. This, it happens. It does happen. The problem, again, is that in today's economic business rules of the NFL, they don't give you much choice. You really don't have the chance to be patient anymore. The league just won't let you do it.
I'll give you the best example to me of the opposite end of the spectrum, a team actually preaching patience. Coincidentally, this brings Jim Harbaugh back into the equation. Alex Smith.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, to me, he's the best example. No, but a team actually stuck with a guy that they drafted and waited and waited and waited. He was drafted in 2005, Alex Smith. Mm-hmm. Things clicked for him. Harbaugh didn't arrive until 2011. And think about how many seasons. And he completely missed the 2008 season as I bring his numbers up. So that's the rare occurrence.
Yeah.
Where a team actually 5-6 years down the road still hangs on to a guy, goes through multiple coordinators. You're not finding an Alex Smith example across the NFL.
That's not going to happen anymore.
Yeah.
The rules won't let you.
Speaking of coaching carousel news, Dave Canales, the Bucs offensive coordinator, is going to become the new Panthers head coach. He emerged as a last-second candidate, especially based on what Tampa Bay did in the playoffs late in the season. And Canales did a great job with Baker Mayfield this past season. Mm-hmm. Big reason why Baker, I think, should win Comeback Player of the Year. You wonder now, Baker's going to have another new offensive coordinator if he stays in Tampa. Wow. I feel for him from that standpoint. But, I mean, you don't want to stand in the way of a coach, right, getting a job. But my goodness, here we go again. Baker has a great year, and now he loses his play caller. So Tampa Bay is going to have to search for another offensive coordinator. And Canales, interestingly, Canales came over from Seattle. He paid his dues. He worked with Pete Carroll. So he has experience. I guess I'm a little surprised from Carolina's standpoint, Paul, and you know how many different coaches Dave Tepper's been through. It was 6 in 6 seasons, including interim. But here's why I'm surprised. He went down the road of a Matt Rule. It didn't work out. Then he brings in Frank Reich. I mean, he barely gave Frank a chance.
He did not really give him much of a chance.
Frank was there not even for about half a season.
That wasn't right.
And then Steve Wilkes, he passes on. I guess I'm a little surprised that he's going for an unproven commodity, I guess is my point. Like, I would have thought if this is the cycle and so many attractive individuals who are proven are out there, I would have thought Carolina would have thought about going in that direction. But instead, here we go. You're taking a chance on, and once again, I've got nothing against Canales. I think he did a really good job, but the man has never been the head coach of a football team. You can't at least dismiss that. But
I was never a big Baker Mayfield guy, but he had one dynamite season this year.
Yeah. And that's why I'm sure he received a lot of attention, Canales, on the interview process front, because when you could take a player who's been moved around and give him stability, I think it says an awful lot. So for those of you counting at home, we now have 5 head coaching positions that have been filled, and there are still 3 to be determined. including the Commanders in the NFC East. Now, why do I bring up all of the movement and the conspiracy theories and everything else? Because there is no better segue to our next caller, who I'm sure is on top of these. I'm actually surprised that we beat him to the punch with respect to the news around the NFL. Wilson has delighted us with his presence from Roxbury. What's happening, Wilson?
Hey, how can I top that intro?
You can't. You'll never top that.
I'm gonna see if I can make it worth it. Hey, how you guys doing?
Hi.
Well, right now we're doing okay. Let's see how this phone call progresses, and then we'll tell you exactly how we're doing.
You'll like this phone call. It's gonna be super controversial, but I think you'll like it.
Oh, okay. Well,
hey, listen,
you had me a controversial, yes.
Real quick. Real quick before I get to my point. Brock Purdy can't throw the ball 30 yards down the field. You cannot win. The NFL is going to catch up eventually. I mean, I don't know how he is in the NFC Championship. Obviously, the 49ers are the most talented roster in the NFL, but you can't play quarterback like that. I mean, after 30 yards, he just throws it out. Hey, listen, go get it. I mean, if the Giants have players that can go get it like that, we'll be in the playoffs too. You can't play quarterback like that. Eventually, you have to make one tight window throw, and you can see. I mean, it was unbelievable to watching the game against the Green Bay Packers. But forget about that real quick. Let me know what you think about that later, Paulie. After I hang up.
Wait, just Paul? I can't weigh in. Only Paul's allowed to
All
answer
I'm going to
that?
tell you, Wilson, is that Brock Purdy.
Lance, I just
Okay.
because I said hi to you first.
No, I'm just giving you a hard time.
I just want to, and I don't want to waste time on this, but Brock Purdy is one of 5 finalists for the National Football League MVP award. So regardless of what you believe his deficiencies are, there's obviously enough of people who still think he has something of redeeming value. Just go ahead to your next point.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, listen. I want to ask you guys something. There's 2 kinds of fans, right? Giants fans. There's crazy fans like myself.
Okay, at least you said it, so we didn't have to. Go ahead. Yes, that's one.
I admit it, guys. But,
Okay.
but listen, we make up 80% of the fans. Okay, and then the other fans, that see everything rosy and rainbows, and we're going to hold hands together and sing Kumbaya.
Lollipops, too. Yes.
Most of us are. Okay, so because I get this sense, right? This sense that somehow, if the Giants don't make the playoffs, and if the Giants go like 6-10, like we did this year, or 7-11. That it's going to be okay.
They play 18 games now in a regular season. Look at you. I didn't know that you were getting that creative. But go ahead, yes. Yeah.
I said, oh, I'm sorry.
You said 7-11. I didn't realize that was feasible in today's NFL. Man, kudos to the team that went 7-11 this season. I want to meet them. That is a heck of an achievement. Yeah.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
We're totally off the rails.
Well, that's what happens when...
Let me ask you guys something seriously. What is your expectations for the Giants next year? Answer me that, and I'll give you my answer.
Well, I don't have any yet.
We haven't had an off season.
There's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done.
Paulie, listen, but fans like myself, we can't think like that. I want to ask something. I just want to say this: if Brian Dable and Joe Shane think that they can go again 6-11, 7-10, 8-9, and not make the playoffs and be back for a 4th year, they're delusional.
Why are you tagging that thought on those guys? That in itself is just blatantly unfair. How do you know what they're thinking?
Paulie, because are you going to tell me again that next year is another rebuilding year?
No, what I'm telling you is this.
What?
They've got several months to do some retooling with this team. First and foremost, they've got to get a defensive coordinator in here. And hopefully it's a guy who's going to do a really good job with a defense that does have a lot of quality players on it, okay? And then hopefully that Meadowlands injury bug is going to get sprayed with a giant can of Raid and not bother this team in 2024. And the Giants will have a great season that will make you very, very happy. How about that?
Paulie, you're talking to me like a journalist, and I understand that is your job, and I love you. I love Lance, but I don't want to think like that. I don't want to think about injury. Everybody's got injuries, Paulie. Cleveland.
Well, sure. I understand that, but for you to sit here and immediately become pessimistic and paint the negative picture saying, look, this team, if this team does the misery that I think they're going to do, that's going to create doom and disaster for this staff. Don't go there. Why would you do that?
Paulie. I'm not pessimistic because that's the sense that I'm getting, like, by listening to a lot of people, to even Joe Shane, that maybe the first year was a mirage and this past year was the real deal. Paulie, we've been through 10 years of retooling, dumpster.
Okay, Wilson, I'm going to make this simple for you. I'm going to make it really, really simple for you. The roster as it stands today, I'm talking about age, experience, quality of play, and with some moderate cap room, as well as some premier draft choices, is in much better position than this roster was 2 years ago when this new administration took over. Okay? That's not up for debate. That's not up for debate. That's a fact. Now, what they do with that positioning is going to determine what happens during this 2024 season. Let it play out. Let these guys do what they need to do. But please do not talk about falling downhill when they're starting from a better point than where they originally came from.
Paulie, but what kind of fun is that if I don't ask you guys the hypotheticals like Lance?
Well, fun for you maybe, but not fun for us.
Jump in, Lance. Jump in.
I will. Well, I will let you go. No, I'll respond to your question, and we appreciate the phone call, Wilson. And we can always rely on the controversy and the game of, I don't know what to call it when he calls in. But here's the way you got to look at it. And I have said this time again on all different shows over the years. Just because you have one good season, Paul, and this is not just the Giants, this is all NFL franchises, you can't be of the mindset that after one good season, that means the next 5 or 6, there's not going to be any issues. And
well, especially with the business plan of this league.
Correct.
It's meant to destroy you every few years. So they want you to be turned over like a wheelbarrow.
So I go back to, I think his last point, Wilson's, was when they made the playoffs in 2022, the feeling was, okay, this is going to be a sign of what's yet to come. The NFL doesn't operate like that. And we talked about how many close games there were. All those one-score games they played. A tougher schedule. They're playing the AFC North next season. And this is not me painting a difficult picture, but the AFC North was the only division this year that had all 4 teams above 500. Okay? Now, could a team or two fall off? Sure, it could happen next year. But I think you like the direction of all 4 of those franchises. The Giants are going to have to face all 4 of those teams next season. It's also hard to get a read on, Paul, what this division is going to look like, the NFC East.
No doubt.
In 2024, because you look at the Eagles are going in a transition where they're bringing in 2 new play callers, assuming Nick Sirianni doesn't take over on the offensive side of the ball. They're getting up there in age, especially on the defensive front. They may move on from some individuals. The Commanders are going to have all new GM, new coaching staff. So we don't even know what they're going to operate with. We don't even know who the quarterback of the Commanders is going to be. The only team that you could say, probably barring dramatic changes, is the Cowboys, who are going to probably bring back, I'd say, a good piece of their roster. So that's the only team.
No, they've got big time cap trouble.
No, well, but
so they're going to have to lose some very important players, and Dan Quinn may be out of there as the DC.
Sure, but I'm talking about Dak is going to be back, C.D. Lamb, Micah Parsons.
Well, Dak being back may not be a positive for some of us.
But that's what I mean. I mean the core of the team, the main weaponry,
compared
to the other teams, is probably going to be intact. So that's the only team that maybe you can at least try to speculate with as close to facts as humanly possible. The rest of the division, you just don't know. So there's so much evolving within this division, it's hard to put your finger on what the competition is going to look like, how challenging is it going to be, and where the Giants fit in to that equation. It's way too early with respect to that. But we know they've got to score more points next season. Okay, if that doesn't change, it's going to make it that much more pressing. And we know that they're going to go through a bit of a transition on defense because Wink Martindale's not calling the plays. So those 2 facts, they exist, but that doesn't mean that it's automatically troublesome for the Giants until we see more of the pieces of this puzzle.
What we do know for sure, without question, and injuries are always questionable and you can never predict injuries. What we do know without question is that the Giants are one of the younger teams in the league.
Yeah.
In terms of their starting core guys. They are one of the younger ones, and a lot of these young guys have had experience. So it's not that they're young unknowns, but they're young guys who have had a bite of the hamburger and showed you that there's some real potential there. I mean, who's not excited about Wan'Dale Robinson and Jalen Hyatt? Seriously. I mean, if you're not excited about those two guys, then you did not watch any of the Giants games last year.
Well, specifically, Wan'Dale, who's coming off the torn ACL, and I think in the second half of the season we saw if he can put a full season together, you can see what he's capable of doing because that has explosion written all over it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately for the Giants, they've just seen it in bits and pieces. They haven't seen it with respect to continuity.
And I'll also add this. I can't wait to see more of Banks at cornerback. He had a solid rookie season. Now, as a rookie, there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be some mistakes. We all know that. But look, I've seen enough of rookie corners in this league. Very few of them come in and immediately excel. Very, very few of them. As far as rookie seasons go, this guy had as a press cover corner, this guy had a solid rookie season when you grade him on that rookie curve. And huge ups as far as I'm concerned for Deonte Banks. Huge ups.
It's going to make the conversation about who the new defensive coordinator is even that much more fascinating.
No question.
Because of how he'll be used. And one other thing that I just wanted to respond to, I know you briefly did with respect to the point about Purdy and not throwing the deep ball. Jimmy Garoppolo was criticized for not throwing the ball deep down the field. A lot of check downs, right? Mm-hmm. And they went to a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. So it's, to me, the Niners scheme.
Right. It's what they do.
But that, to me, that does not get brought into the conversation.
Well, it needs to. It's part of it.
What they ask their quarterbacks to do, how much they rely on the playmakers, yardage after the catch, does not call for the quarterback, and in this case it's Purdy, constantly throwing the ball for 40 to 50 yards down the field. That's just not what the offense is made to do. If Purdy was asked to do that, I think we'd have more of a sample size to determine how he'd operate. It's unfair to put him within those confines, given the fact that they don't need him to do that, nor do they ask him to do that. So I think that gets missed from the conversation. And if you're winning football games, at the end of the day, they don't need to put you in that position.
I would say this. Had Jimmy Garoppolo stayed as the Niners starting quarterback, and we don't know if he would have gotten injured again or not. But I would tell you, I don't think it's a stretch to believe that had he been able to play a full season, they would still be playing this weekend with Jimmy G as the quarterback if it wasn't Brock Purdy.
Well, Shanahan has had a great track record. I mean, remember Nick Mullins starting against the Giants a few years back?
Oh,
remember
I do.
Jimmy got hurt against the Jets the previous year. Look at what Nick Mullins did.
You got to bring that up.
Well, no, it's to solidify and emphasize your point.
Well, thank you for emphasizing. I know, but it's
You're criticizing me for helping.
It's a memory that I don't wish to have.
I understand that, but sometimes examples may be painful.
Yes.
But at the end of the day,
indeed,
I made you look better, so you should be patting me on the back from that standpoint.
Thank you,
go.
Lance.
Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, that's so meaningful. A very sentimental way to end the program here on Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Today's episode, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcast. We'll be up and running again on Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. For Paul Dottino, I'm Lance Medow. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest, and we'll speak to you right here on BBKL. Have a good one.